welcome to another episode of the Blockchain Story. This episode is going to be in English because we have a very special guest here. It's Mona Elisa. It's a big pleasure to have you here today. Hi, Mona.
Thanks, it's great to be here, and I'm glad to learn it in English. That's a relief.
No, very happy to do it in English because it's great to have you here. I've been looking at what you're doing the last years, and it's very interesting to have you here today to talk about those things. But maybe as a short introduction, the Blockchain Story is about having chats with people in the digital asset and blockchain space. And Mona Elisa is a person that has been in the space quite early on. You co-founded a company called Millenport at that time. It got rebranded to Enzyme, and you are now heading a company that's related to that project. We'll talk about that, called Avantgarde Finance. And you are very much into the space of on-chain asset management. So very much blockchain focused, but your original background is actually in traditional finance, right? Having been at the investment bank of Goldman Sachs, right? That's a bit what everyone can know about you. But what are the things that people actually don't know about you? Is there something
what people don't know about me? I guess, many people kind of don't know where I'm from originally. So I'm originally Palestinian.
Okay.
Although I was born in England and grew up in many different countries. So in England, I'm called American. They think I'm American. In America, they think I'm English. In Switzerland, they have no idea. So that's, I guess, one thing. The other thing that I think people don't know about me, and actually I think you just learned it before the interview, is that I have two kids, two young kids. One of them is nearly 4, one of them is 7 months old. Really it makes being an entrepreneur look easy. I think those, I'll stop there. I think those are kind of the two facts that come to mind.
I was saying you have your origins in traditional finance. What is it, what you learned there and your experiences you made in that space that made you make that shift to the blockchain finance space?
That's a really great question. I started my career managing money at Goldman. So I was a trader and managed money, a pretty large book for them. And in 2011, I got hired by one of the hedge fund clients we had to go and work for him in Geneva. That was actually my first entrance into Geneva. And I managed money for them for 4 years. And aside from all the investing and the trading experience I got, I really was about to learn my biggest lesson still after leaving. When I left Jaber, I left because I was approached by a family office and they wanted me to launch a long-short equity fund for them. And they said, we'll seed you $20 million. And I said, wow, that sounds great. It's less money than I'm used to, but this is a start and it's my fund. This is my first entrepreneurial project, and I think I have that entrepreneurial spirit. So I said, let's do it. I mean, I've always done so well in my career. What could possibly go wrong? And actually, the lesson of that year was probably the biggest of my life. It was a massive failure. But again, you don't learn unless you have failures in your career and life in general. What I learned was that setting up a fund from scratch, especially if it's a small fund, very high barriers to entry, very costly, takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And then once it's up and running, oh my God, the maintenance, the operational administrative maintenance, everything in traditional finance is done in steel booking trades on paper. You have to fill out a spreadsheet at the end of the day for every single trade you did, 40 columns for each trade you did. In equities, one way, in futures, another way, in FX, another way, in options, another way. So good luck. I mean, you could often find me in the office until 11 p.m. You often found me in the office in the weekends. Could not afford, the number of staff to help me that I would have needed at that size of a fund. Now, when you think of like big funds or big asset management companies, they typically have about 5 support people per investment professional. So what I learned in that year was, oh my God, we are so backwards. It's like the only sector in the whole world that hasn't been disrupted by technology. I could not believe. And so actually I decided to close the fund after that year. And that led me, I decided to take some time out. And it was that time out that gave me the space to discover Bitcoin first and then blockchain. And as soon as I discovered it, I couldn't stop reading about it. But of course, it was so technical back then. I didn't understand half of it, so I decided I'm going to get on a plane back to Crypto Valley.
Okay.
And I'm going to immerse myself in the scene and get them to teach me things, and I'll teach them things, and and that's what happened. That's how I came about. But I think the ideas that followed later with Melon and later Enzyme really were inspired by that failure, by all the challenges that I met.
Yeah. How did you make this bridge from like learning about Bitcoin to realizing that the technology behind it might be a big potential for the problems you faced earlier? Is that by talking to the people you were mentioning, or how did you?
I didn't. So it wasn't like I didn't stumble on Bitcoin because I thought it was a solution. Actually, it's a funny story. I have my brother works in Google for the last 15 years, and we were having dinner. He hates people in finance, so I was in finance and he's in Google, and he was telling me how evil I was. And then he asked me, what do I think of Bitcoin? And I told him I didn't know, and he laughed. And he said, I can't believe you call yourself a finance person and you've never heard of Bitcoin. So of course I never had time to research it when I was working. But after I left, I said, okay, I have to find a good response for my brother. So I started reading it for that reason.
Yeah.
But then as I read more, the more I read, the more I loved. And then I looked at Ethereum. And then when I understood smart contracts and ICOs and token issuances, I said, wow, the future of assets is digital. And smart contracts can help massively automate the entire operational and administrative side of finance. And this is so powerful because it means that small, medium-sized businesses can scale much faster, especially in the asset management space, because the underlying fixed and variable costs in finance are so high now because the processes are so old-fashioned.
Can you tell us a bit about the technology or also the business case behind Melon and Enzyme, or what you were trying to do, trying to build with that technology, and which problems you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so from my perspective, what I was trying to solve was this problem of automation. So what I was always very excited about was we can create an asset management protocol that automates all the really boring stuff that normally you have to hire people to do manually. So the protocol enables people to set up an investment vehicle, a fund, for example. It enables you to configure any parameter you want, like who's allowed to invest in that fund, what management fee you want to charge, what performance fee you want to charge, what the manager is and isn't allowed to do, if there's a stop loss, all these kind of things that you get in traditional finance. Except the beautiful thing is that all of these rules are in code, in smart contracts to be specific, and they're enforced by blockchain technology. So it's super secure. You can have this fund structure which can only manage digital assets. It's non-custodial, so it means people have the right, not the obligation, but the right to keep hold of their own assets at all times without trusting an intermediary. You completely eliminate counterparty risk because you're only trading with kind of decentralized exchanges and DEXs and using blockchain technology to settle. And you have full transparency at all times, which you don't get in traditional finance. In traditional finance, you're lucky if a fund publishes a NAV once a month or once a quarter. In our world, you have a NAV every 14 seconds, every time the blockchain new block updates.
Now you were mentioning you were managing money before, and suddenly you were managing a tech company.
Yeah.
Isn't that a very difficult transition as well, in terms of people you're working together, in terms of
Massively.
Way of work?
Massively. For me, I found it personally very difficult. I think the first thing that suffers is I had a bit of imposter syndrome. So, I come from a field which I know inside out, and I'm in a field which I can barely understand what they're talking about if I listen to two software engineers discussing with each other. And for me, that was very challenging. And sometimes I think it took me a couple of years to really get the confidence that I needed in order to thrive. I made mistakes, hiring mistakes. Most of my company was the engineers, right? So I made mistakes on hiring, assessing people's ability. But what I found is at some point, the way to overcome confidence is to join them, right? To teach yourself about the code, and it was just like a relentless kind of asking questions, studying kind of in the evenings, taking a coding course in the evenings, etc. And ultimately, I think what I came to realize eventually was that sure, I might not be the world's best developer, but I have a bunch of other experience in life. And unlike most people in the space who come in very young, most of them haven't failed yet. And I think the failure still to this day has probably been one of my biggest lessons.
And what you manage to do, what I see in other companies in the sector, what a lot of companies so manage to do is having this decentralized mind also bring to the company, right? A lot of people coming from the financial sector, us included probably in the projects we are doing, you still have this silo thinking somehow, that you try to build a company, right? A traditional company. But what you did from very early on is thinking in a decentralized ecosystem way. Also with having these protocols which you then release to the public, which is a totally new way to do things, right? Did you have that thinking in mind all the time, or was it also like getting into the space and somehow?
I would say that. I mean, we were the first to ever decentralize the DeFi protocol. I think we were the first in history. It was an experience because we were the first. It had never been done before, so we had to design our governance. And I think on balance we've had a good experience, but it's something that, I mean, you know, one of the big kind of drivers behind DeFi is that you want to eliminate kind of centralized power, centralized decision making. And I think that works to a degree. And I think that the DAO is a very good, we're now a DAO, I think 13 members on the DAO, maybe more. Very good at kind of saying no to certain things that don't make sense and supporting things that do make sense. And yes, ultimately we gave back power. However, I think that DAOs still struggle a bit with the efficiency that centralized companies have. You know, being able to make decisions quickly and react quickly to things, because every time you need to have a vote and a discussion, and 13 people need to get up to speed, and those 13 people have other full-time jobs. And so it has been an interesting experience. I think one of the reasons that I decided to found Avant-Garde Finance after we decentralized the protocol was to say, okay, so now we decentralized the protocol, but maybe now Avant-Garde Finance can play a role in the ecosystem, like anyone else is free to, and help move things along quicker. So, you know, take a little bit of a leadership role, and at any point if the DAO doesn't agree with the way we're doing things, it can remove us from the equation.
Yeah, okay. And can you tell us a bit about the new company Avant-Garde Finance, what you are trying to achieve with it, and how the business works there?
Yeah, so Avant-Garde has evolved a bit in the last 3.5 years. So initially we've been doing a lot of the core development work for Enzyme, and sometimes other projects as well, not just Enzyme, but primarily Enzyme. About 12 to 18 months ago, we realized that, okay, we have this great protocol, we're super proud of it. I think it's the only decentralized asset management protocol around today, even though in 2016 when I founded it, at one point there were 14 competitors. So, you know, we've survived 3 bear markets so far. And I said, okay, why, you know, we've done well, but we haven't done amazing. Why is that? And I realized that maybe it's because people are afraid of the regulatory consequences. One of the biggest questions we get is, how do I set up a DeFi fund compliantly? And either you have to, the regulator tells you have to go through the traditional route, get the fund administrator, get a custodian, get a blah, 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 and get a license. And then I'm like, well, if I do that, then I take away all the benefits of blockchain, which is automating these things, giving self-custody, and all of these things have fees. And my protocol can do these things for you automated and much lower cost. So I keep saying, like, that doesn't work for us. Like, sorry, but if we're going to do it that way, then there's no point to this protocol. So I said, let's finally solve this problem. Let's go out there and let's figure this out. And eventually, working with lots of different regulators, we found a solution which we're building out into a platform, which does have a regulated compliance layer around it, but a very light one, and enables people to set up funds compliantly in very short time. So instead of taking 6 to 12 months, you can do it in a couple of weeks, more than 50-60% cheaper than if you did it in the traditional finance way, and still preserving the values of DeFi, i.e. eliminating the counterparty risk and still being able to hold self-custody of the assets.
So going forward, you're not only hosting but not only providing with the protocol you built the technological framework, but also somehow a regulatory umbrella for the whole thing.
Yeah, so the protocol is open source. Anyone can use it however they want, but if people are struggling how to use it compliantly and they don't want to do that work themselves, they'll be able to plug into our kind of umbrella structure, our platform, and set up and manage the funds compliantly.
And you're not yet live with that, right? Or gonna go live soon?
This is actually something that's pre-launch, but we're hoping to announce actually in Switzerland in June. So with much more information.
And jurisdiction-wise, is it like a specific jurisdiction I'm gonna launch the fund then, or is it?
Yeah, our first jurisdiction was an offshore jurisdiction, although we have been in talks with FINMA and other regulators around the world. Ultimately, we hope to get to a place where we have more than one option. FINMA have been really helpful and open-minded, but they are quite slow compared to other jurisdictions to respond. But I'm confident that we'll get there soon.
Yeah. You also co-founded an association in Switzerland called MAMA. That was like one goal of that association was to lobby and bring that on-chain asset management topic forward.
Yeah.
Is that working, or it's just very slow?
Yeah, it's working, but these things take time.
Yeah.
I really, and it's also a very collective effort. I think we can't change the world alone. But Hans-Jörg, who runs the association on day-to-day basis, he's forged some very good relationship with other associations. He works closely with the Asset Management Association of Switzerland, nothing to do with blockchain, just the normal asset management. Also some other initiatives in Europe and also the US. And I think collectively, what we've done is we've made a name for ourselves. We have this niche where we are really the experts on-chain asset management. But we have to work with other bigger, more powerful associations, let's say, who don't necessarily have the expertise, but maybe have more influence than MAMA does.
Can you detail a bit on like the main pain points in terms of regulatory frameworks that are currently or should have to be changed in order to make it easier to be compliant?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you ask, this isn't just in Switzerland, you see this in many places. When you ask a regulator, well, I'd like to do this thing on the blockchain, which is related to finance, how do I do it? And they will typically just say, oh, well, the rules are clear, just go and read them and follow the rules. And then you go and read the rules and you're like, oh, this is so painful because the rules impose all of this unnecessary fat, that's not necessary anymore because we can automate it with smart contracts. So then you go back and you try to explain to them and then say, well, you're just going to have to follow the rules. And you basically it has been difficult to have a conversation, or it's taken a lot of work to have a conversation. So then you say, okay, maybe the regulator is not the place to start. Maybe we should start with the legislators. And then that's something we have also been involved in. But legislation moves so slowly, and it's so political. So, we make like little adjustments, but I think the key thing is you cannot expect regulations as they exist today, which were designed for a paper-based industry full of intermediaries, to be applicable for the digital asset economy. Digital assets have completely different assumptions underlying, completely different risks associated with them, and therefore a much lighter smart contracts to a large degree can regulate automate regulation, and the part that it can't regulate it are very few. And so it requires a much lighter regime in order to be able for the economies to be able to fully take advantage of the innovations that have happened in the last few years.
Okay. And if you look at traditional asset managers today, most of them, they haven't even yet started looking at the asset class itself.
No, but they all have a head of digital assets now.
Yeah, at least the big ones, right? Yeah. But if I look at the asset management landscape in Switzerland, where you have a lot of like smaller players, they're not looking at the technology yet. They start maybe asking, okay, what is it? How does it impact my business? What would it tell them? Like, what should they do? Not having any know-how of blockchain technology, but somehow seeing, okay, that might change my line of work a bit. What can they do?
I think if they're not in alternative investments, it's probably not very much at this point. If you're doing equities or fixed income and you're a small to medium fund, there's probably not a lot that the blockchain can solve for you today, although I believe that would look very different in 5 to 10 years. However, if you're an alternative manager and specifically you're interested in digital assets as a strategy, as a offering to your clients, I think there's a lot you can be doing.
And also using, now independent of where you're investing in, but using the technology. I understand that if you want to do on-chain asset management, currently it's limited to tokenized assets underlying, right? But if you are in that segment, if you can make alternative investment strategies, how can they enter that space? Should they simply set up an account and try to do an on-chain asset management on the platforms that you are working on, or are there any easier options? Or
I think ours will be the easiest option available if you want to do it in a decentralized way, or or leveraging kind of purpose-built technology. Yeah. If you go down the institutional route, not a centralized route. Yeah, it's possible, but it's basically replicating the old structure. Yeah. So it's not using purpose-built technology. So you're forced into a lot more operational admin headaches than you actually need. And also fees. So, for example, the fund is forced to use a custodian. A custodian probably charges 50 bips a year. That's before any other costs, right? Yeah. In our world, there is no custodian. It's the blockchain. There's a smart contract, right? And you get back a fund token. Now, if you're not comfortable with self-custody, you can put your fund token with any custodian you like, and then you don't have to worry about it. But we don't oblige you to. Yeah. So if you want to reduce that 50 bips and you're you're well informed on how to keep your key security, that's already a big saving. Yeah. Then you have the elimination of counterparty risk. You have legal side of things. I mean, setting up a fund, you have to think all the jurisdictions, you have to research which one is best for you and which ones are the pros and cons, but before you know it, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and you still don't have a clear answer. It takes a lot of time, so I guess what I like to think is that we've done a lot of that research for people. And if you're excited about launching an on-chain fund that has no counterparty risk and that can empower the idea of self-custody, which by the way is kind of the reason that most of us got into this space, because we got excited about the idea of self-custody, then I think that our platform today is probably the only one that will service that kind of solution. But there are other ways. They just have more friction and more costs.
Okay. Maybe to go to the end, if you look those 5 to 10 years, you were saying it might look different a bit then. Yeah. How do you think the asset management industry will evolve, be it in 5 or 10 years, once the technology can actually be used also in a compliant sense?
So I think that's really interesting. So what you said before, I think the really big move for the space is when many more real world assets are digitalized. So when you have a digital share class of Apple stock or a digital share class of Google shares and anything, right now we're kind of very much still limited to native crypto tokens. We are starting to see some real world assets come in, like there's now 4 projects doing tokenized treasuries. We have seen JP Morgan launch a bond on the Ethereum blockchain, We've seen some efforts. I think SocGen, BNP have done some things, but it's still very nascent. We're far away from every single S&P stock being available on chain. So in terms of how does it look 5-10 years from now? I think that will be much closer. That reality will be much closer where real world assets are on chain, and as a result, now every asset manager should be looking at it, and the large ones in particular. If they're not looking at it, then they risk overcome by competitors who are providing the same products for lower costs or more transparency or zero counterparty risk. So I think that it's going to be an interesting decade.
Looking very much forward to seeing how the space, the industry evolves. Thanks a lot for your insight. It was very interesting.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Mona, for the talk. Thank you very much.